my name is Simone Neighbors, and I am the Demand Generation Manager here at ReadyTalk.
And I am Brandon Hess, the Inbound Marketing Manager here at ReadyTalk.
And this is our first attempt at a Q&A session from a recent webinar that we did in our monthly webinar series, so this should be just as exciting for you all as it is for us. The recent webinar that we actually hosted that we're doing a follow-up from the Q&A on because we had so many great questions was with a company called Vidyard, and it was webinars, the gateway drug to a video marketing strategy. And we actually had kind of a Breaking Bad theme off of this particular webinar. It was pretty fun.
Very clever.
Because who doesn't love Breaking Bad?
Exactly.
So we had a ton of questions that we actually didn't even get the whole amount of time to answer, so we took the top 8 questions from that webinar, and we are giving ourselves a minute apiece to answer those 8 questions. So
yes,
you get 8 questions, 8 answers in 8 minutes. We're even going to set ourselves a timer.
Right, it's like a game show.
To keep us legit. So, I'll key up some questions for you, Brandon, and then we'll flip-flop and do the same.
Sounds good.
All right.
Perfect.
Let me set my timer here really quick. 1 minute on the clock. First question. Somebody asked, we worked with a video production company to create a series of videos. Is it better to schedule these videos or put them out on YouTube all at once?
I think if you're making a good amount of videos all at once, I would think you'd want to tie them to campaigns. So if you had a certain campaign tied to each one, it probably makes sense to tie those together and then send them out in tandem with those campaigns. Now, if this whole campaign of videos itself is just one giant campaign, then yeah, you might want to put them all up at the same time. What you want to keep in mind is if it's relevant with what you're also messaging at the time. So you don't want to send out all the videos and then try to send people to that one video and kind of cloud and I guess make a lot of noise. So I would tie each campaign to each video to its own campaign if that exists, or kind of make a campaign about announcing all of your videos.
Good answer. With 2 seconds to spare.
Nice.
All right.
All right.
Next question.
So the question for you was, how many snippets would you recommend for a 45-minute webinar?
All right. So I'll relate this actually to an example that we recently did with one of our previous webinars as well. It was a typical kind of 45-minute to 60-minute long webinar, which you would think if you're taking kind of 2 to 3 minute snippets based on kind of your own time frame for digestion of video content, you could get a ton out of that, maybe 9 or 10. But I would say to kind of look at what those natural breaking points are within that webinar. If it is a 45-minute long webinar, maybe you get 3 to 4 snippets out of it where it is kind of like a natural breaking point and kind of creating little segments or mini webinars from your webinar content. I like to call it webinar inception. So again, I think it kind of just depends on if you can kind of chapter out your webinars or think of how you can chapter out your webinars before producing that live content so you have some natural breaking points to do so. But I would say maybe 4 to 5 for a typical 60-minute webinar.
Nice. Good answer. Good answer.
All right, my next question for you. We had a lot of questions about webinar editing tools, video editing tools. Can you import a webinar into kind of a video editing tool, and in what format would you need that to be in?
So that depends on what you're using to record your webinar, right? So a lot of webinar services will have proprietary formats so that you can only edit it within that service. So you want to keep that in mind before you start down this path. What you want to find out is if you can get your webinars recording into like a common use, like an MP4 or a AVI or any of those common files you'll see. Then you can import that into any type of editing software like Adobe Premiere or Windows Movie Maker, or any of those types of softwares will allow you to import a public or common movie file format. But if it's in proprietary format, you're going to have to do something to get that to that common movie format. So there's a lot of tools out there to do that. Depending on the webinar service you use, sometimes they'll let you export that out as an MP4 or alike. So make sure you can get it out of the system that you recorded it with. Camtasia is a thing that you can record webinars with, so maybe use that if you know you have a proprietary software keeping you from doing that. So
great. 2 seconds left is fair. And actually, I'm just going to tack on to the end of that because it should be a quick answer. When we're kind of talking about cutting our webinars down into chunks or snippets or kind of this digestible bits, what tools, both free and paid options, are you recommending? And I know you threw out a few names in there, but just kind of a quick list of rundowns of webinar or video editing software.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to be trying to do a lot of like crazy Michael Bay explosions with your webinars. Usually, like that'd be awesome. But a lot of the free things that come with your computer, whether you use PC or Mac. So on PC, there's a Windows Movie Maker. It's great. It'll allow you just to edit the files down, put titles, put credits on it if you want. Does all the simple things. You got iMovie with Apple. So those two things are probably right out of the box, the simplest things you want to download. Paid, Adobe Premiere, Adobe After Effects as well, if you want to put in some of those cool explosions. Final Cut Pro, there's a bunch of those. And then Camtasia is a great little simple capture tool and editing tool, so you can do some editing in that as well. And those are all paid options, but those would be my recommendation. That's what I use Adobe Premiere myself. So
awesome.
Yeah.
All right, your turn.
All right, so another question we had is about people that actually have done a lot of webinars over the years, and their question was, we have several webinars a year, and we put the whole thing up on our site. No chapters, just raw. Is it worth to go back and edit all of those archived webinars?
Oh, good question. Well, if you've had a massive series of webinar, like our webinar series we've had for almost 5 years, and that could be 16 pages of webinars. So my recommendation would be not to go back necessarily and try to chunk out each one of those webinars, because that's going to take an enormous amount of manpower and human resources. So I would say go back to maybe your 4 or 5 most recent webinars and find those snippets that you think are maybe most relevant, that are being talked about maybe in your industry amongst peers and thought leaders. And once you've done that, because that in and of itself is definitely going to be a bit of an undertaking, kind of finding those cut points and everything. But if you'd like to dig up an older one that you had a huge amount of success with, going back to maybe find those top players, cutting out those snippets, and then you can kind of resurface some of that information that's maybe been buried for a while, and maybe you start launching a new campaign around an email, a blog series, that kind of thing. So that'd be my recommendation.
Nice.
All right. Brandon, another question from our audience. 1 minute on the clock.
Boom.
Why not put a live webinar out raw, like in its regular format, no cuts, no editing? She asked, isn't it good for people to hear the whole thing, including the Q&A session?
That's a good question. We get that question a lot, actually. And one of the big reasons is that when you record a webinar, there's a lot of downtime, right? That people that are attending the webinar are expecting, right? They're waiting for everybody to show up. That might take 5, 10, 15 minutes. Explain the house rules of how question and answers are going to happen. All those things that might take 15 to 20 minutes of the first part of the webinar as people get there before it starts even. So a lot of that, when you put it on the website or on wherever you're promoting this video, isn't going to be as relevant to people that didn't attend, right? It's just going to be something that they're going to have to scroll through, fast forward through. So you want to make it really relevant. That's why we recommend snippetizing it, if that's even a word.
I like it.
Snippetizing?
Snippetizing.
Trademark. If you make it into snippets, then you can know what the theme is about, and you can kind of give people an idea of what they're about to watch and about to learn. With a raw format, they're going to have to sort of watch the whole thing. And if that's a 45 minutes, an hour, it's a lot of time for people to kind of find what they were looking for. So cutting it down gives people a lot more idea what it's going to be about, and it also gives you some idea how to promote it.
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
Yeah.
All right.
So this regarding promotion, one of the questions we had was, along with our own site and on YouTube, what are the best venues for sharing your videos? Where to share your videos for maximum reach?
Gotcha. We will also include the blog link that Vidyard did in the description below here. They wrote an awesome blog on different webinar snippet, video snippet, promotional channels. But a few that I came across in my own research and some that we use, obviously your own website, first and foremost, put it up on there. Email campaigns, that's a pretty common one to blast it out in. A couple of unique ones that I saw actually were putting a link in your email signature. seems simple enough, but it's something that we forget about. Even when you're out of office, a great place to kind of get it in front of people's faces. Pinterest, so kind of capturing those still images or those splash screens with like what the relevant messaging might be for that particular snippet. So that's kind of applying to that visual audience as well, outside of just people that might be searching on YouTube channels. Run some PPC campaigns around your video, which I know we're going to start kind of taking advantage of in our own programs. Using partners to help you promote your videos as well, which is usually if you have similar audiences as your partners, that's a great place to ask them to kind of help you spread the word about your videos. Last couple ones, obviously your regular social media channels, starting some discussions with peers on LinkedIn groups where it's relevant. Don't be just promotional about your video, but if it applies to the conversation, put it out there too. So I was over by 15 seconds.
That's all right.
Okay.
That's all right. That's a good answer.
All right. But definitely check out the blog post below here that will include that Vidyard row. All right, last question that I have for Brandon. What if your webinars are slide presentations instead of demos? So a regular kind of slide deck, which a lot of marketers, I'm assuming, are using for their webinars, versus a demonstration, which might be like an application share or desktop share that a salesperson might use for a demo. Can you still use this type of webinar with just kind of pushing slides for the purpose of kind of those video snippets? How would you do that?
Yeah, so I would say most people still, when they do a webinar, it slides off of PowerPoint or Keynote or whatever you're using. And to that point, sometimes it might not be the most visually entertaining things just to see a slide go by over and over again. So I think editing, one, is your best friend on that aspect, right? To my former point is to cut out all the fluff and kind of get down to the nitty gritty. So that'll help a bit. Also, a lot of the editing you can do to help with that is maybe put in some. What we're trying here today is, we're using a GoPro camera and a little recorder to try to make our webinars a little bit more visually appealing. Not to say that we're not visually appealing.
We are so visually appealing.
Well done. But just to kind of make it more engaging, because it is a good point. I think when webinars first came out, slides and things were kind of new to have it recorded, but video is becoming more apparent, and I think a lot more people are going to be more engaged if you can add things to it. So even if you're adding things that weren't in the webinar, right? If you can go out and put in new facts or have little Q&A sessions with maybe even the speaker. Think outside of the box. Ugh, I'm going to use that, but think outside of the box. So, I would just go out and try to find new ways to sort of, on whatever budget you have, to make it more than slides. And there's a lot of options there.
Yeah, and I would say the other point to kind of add on to that is if you are doing just kind of pushing slides and making sure that you're kind of pushing those slides quickly. So it almost acts more like of a slideshow, maybe something with animations if your webinar provider supports that, but like making sure that content is visually moving, not just stuck on one particular slide and just having people talking, because that's not that entertaining.
Yeah, and you should keep that in mind when you're designing your slides too, is make sure that you're keeping in mind that these are going to be viewed on a video, right? So that they shouldn't be like 80 paragraphs of text where people aren't going to be able to read it as it flies by. Try to make them just as visually appealing as you'd expect them to be for a video, right? So make it clean and quick and all those things that you would want to keep with an aesthetic eye on how the video is going to look. So
yeah, and kind of thinking how quality slide share presentations are, with main text, not a ton of text, big letters, numbers, people that can capture their attention and the subject of that video quickly.
Yeah, and the audio part, I think, just to add on to that, is when you're doing the webinar, make sure you're talking about the slide you're talking about, because it's going to make sense to people that are on the webinar if you jump around a bit. But if you turn these into snippets and the video is showing just this one slide about whatever theme and you're still talking about something 5 slides ago, it's going to be confusing for the person watching it. So really plan out your webinar presentations for the recording aspect so that the chapter and everybody's on the same page. So.
Awesome.
Yeah.
We took a bit longer on that one, but it's worth it.
Really long minute. That's fine.
So for a lot of you that are maybe starting out on the video strategy piece, where do you start? We think webinars are a phenomenal place to start. Most marketers are doing them right now, so don't let that recording just go to waste on your archive page. Start thinking about making that into digestible content. I hear that a lot. It might be kind of cliche now, but think about how much of a attention span you have when it comes to watching a webinar in itself. Kind of
Right.
that format, I think, is shrinking a little bit. So definitely utilize your recorded content.
Yeah, don't be afraid to try new things and learn new things like we're doing
like
today,
this.
because we're video stars now. So
All
yeah.
over the internet.
Right. Awesome.
All right, I think that's it. We covered all the questions today, and keep your eye out for more of these. We'll definitely start making this a habit of our webinar series with the Q&A.
Yes. So
All
thank you.
right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
High five.
High five.